I'm imagining that the MAPS people are mad that the other MAPS people are
What
taking
other
our letters.
Wait, what other MAPS people?
The minor attracted persons.
Oh.
What is the MAPS? What's the other MAPS?
It's what does MAPS stand for? It's the P is for psychedelic. I know that. Let's look it up.
MAPS Association for Psychedelics.
We're streaming, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, so it's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. It's Rick Doblin, and this guy, let me tell you, he is devoted because his dream was to legalize psychedelics, right? Which we'll talk about psychedelics in general, but I'm sure. But he actually, in order to do something like that, to get government approval to do research on to legalize psychedelics, to do research on them and their power and what they can do for people, it's like it would take years, I guess, to go through the FDA process of applying and getting all these permissions. So he actually went to Harvard and got a PhD, and his PhD thesis was how to lobby the government to approve research for psychedelics. Now, I know I'm not getting that exactly right, but he actually got a doctorate in how to do this, and in the process did it. Like that's like, so the whole purpose of going to Harvard and getting a PhD was so that he could lobby the government in the process and get a PhD while he was doing it.
Got it.
Did we just start recording?
Yeah, and we're live.
Oh, bummer. Okay. The whole intro about Rick Doblin and MAPS,
well,
which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. Well, let's go back into it. So today, welcome to Solid Ground live stream, Monday, May 8th. And our topic today, we're talking about woke psychedelics. What is it? Queering psychedelics and what that means. And Jodi's got some interesting stuff. Do you want to do an intro to Solid Ground first, Jodi? Or do you want to just leap into it?
Solid Ground. Yeah, I'll just do it off the seat of my pants. So Solid Ground is a community, a peer-to-peer support community. It is not psychotherapy, it is not legal advice, but it is just ordinary citizens coming together and talking to each other about their experiences with woke ideology and or COVID mandates and authoritarianism in general. And there are 4 peer facilitators that run 4 groups per week. And you can come and meet other people who have concerns about critical social justice and or COVID mandates. Because I and the other facilitators believe that is the most powerful thing we can do, is help people find each other, because part of the goal is to separate us. And so, yeah, if you join us, you could just go to solidgroundsupport.com, and there will be instructions there for how to join. It's $5 a month, and you can come to as many meetings as you want or as few meetings as you want. That's it.
That's awesome. Yeah, great. Now, we were talking about MAPS and what that is. And I think the first thing I thought when I heard that was the minor attracted person thing, but it's actually a psychedelic organization of some kind. What's the acronym stand for?
Yeah, I'll say it again. It's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
That's an unfortunate crossover, that acronym.
I mean,
well, I think the psychedelic
the map is not the territory, Leslie.
Well, this is it's interesting. It's like this queer theory is kind of getting into everything, and this just seems to be one more area. So it's every discipline seems to have a little bit of this right now to some extent, but this one seems particularly insidious. And so, Jodi, what brought this to your attention?
Well, I think about the psychotherapeutic relationship a lot, and because I've had my own very kind of intense experiences with it and with providers. And I think about the power dynamic and how one person is being paid to facilitate the therapy of another person, and you have different roles. Like one person doesn't talk so much about themselves and the other person does, and like there could be transference, and all these things happen behind a closed door. And so the potential for healing is very, very great, but so too is the potential for abuse. And so that's why, it's partially why we started Solid Ground was, and Leslie, you made your video like on the fact that now this relationship, which is already has the potential for abuse, is now being infiltrated with this ideology in which psychotherapists are being instructed to educate their patients that the trauma they've experienced or the things they've come into therapy for are actually influenced by these greater systems of power and privilege. And even if the patient doesn't agree, like that the therapist is being told, to condescend and say, well, yes, actually, that's not true. Your trauma isn't as great as you think because you're white, or your trauma is actually a lot worse than you think because you're not white. And that's already extremely problematic given the relationship. But now I've been watching this whole time on the side, this legalization of psychedelics and Rick Doblin's work at MAPS with a mixed feelings. On the one hand, I do think that psychedelics are very powerful. They're a much different class of drugs than the other drugs. Like for me, there's two classes of drugs. There's mind shrinking drugs, and I would put alcohol, cocaine, heroin, those kinds of drugs into that category. And then there's mind expanding drugs, which are the psychedelics, like LSD, mushrooms, ecstasy, DMT, so on and so forth. And so I've been watching with great interest Rick Doblin's work in trying to legalize psychedelics for research and the broader legalization movement in general. Here in Northampton, plant medicine has been decriminalized, so people can grow and actually I think even disseminate mushrooms. I'm not a lawyer, but mushrooms are considered plant medicine. And that's a very powerful, we can get into the history of psychedelics and why they were even criminalized in the first place, just because they're so powerful. So I've been watching with great interest this movement to legalize, with great concern, and never mind the woke stuff. Like I've always been very, very concerned about somebody feeling, I can understand the need to have a guide or a trip sitter, but now this movement to professionalize psychedelics and the use, and for people that you can't just call up a friend or this underground guide that you've heard word of mouth and that's going to come and help you have your experience, but now you have to use somebody who has a license and who's certified by the state, and you're going to look somebody up in a phone book, and that person has a degree in psychotherapy, and they're going to help facilitate using their knowledge they learned in their master's degree program. Like that's already very concerning to me because the potential for abuse is so great already in psychotherapy. Now you add psychedelics in and all of the therapist's own shit, and that it just sounds like a disaster. And now we're adding the atomic bomb of woke ideology, which psychotherapists are being instructed to use in behind closed doors. And you add the potential for abuse. It's almost like brainwashing times 1,000%. Anybody who's ever done psychedelics knows the state power. Part of their power is that it puts you in a very
malleable.
I think at their malleable, yeah, or suggestible. You basically have the ego of a 3-year-old, which is to say you don't have an ego, right? Like if you're ingesting large amounts, like you're very suggestible, you're very open, and that's part of the power of psychedelics is you can connect very easily to source or God or the universe or whatever it is. That it's a very spiritual experience. So to be in that kind of state in the hands of a guide who has gone to school to get a master's degree in psychotherapy and is now infiltrated with all this woke stuff, to now be in a room with that person and to have them basically it's like open mind, insert indoctrination here, closed mind. I am appalled. I'm completely appalled. I've been watching things happen and I'm terrified.
Have there been any studies, or do we have any like evidence of this happening, or what to what extent a substance such as some sort of psychedelic substance does open you up to actual brainwashing? Is there research? Have you gone into all that CAA stuff to see to what extent it actually works or not? Because if the ideas are bad, maybe they just kind of like you just poop them out the next day, like some sort of brain fart or something, right?
I don't know.
Do we know that they stick?
Isn't there a lot of CIA stuff from the 60s. Isn't that partially why they were banned? Because they were so powerful.
Well, they were trying to use them.
know.
I should have looked it up. I edited a book on mushrooms. I just maybe in 2004, and I should have looked at my notes before then. But I don't know. I don't know if they were trying to do it for mind control. I don't know how successful they were, but I think the whole notion that one was doing that at all was, like, this is a bad idea. I do wonder if the substances wouldn't allow it. Like, that's getting a little woo out there, but I do wonder if you're on a journey and there's some integrity to the journey that but that's, we don't want to test it, right? Or something.
That's interesting.
I have a curiosity about that. Like, I wonder if, somehow your higher whatever but this is such speculation on my part.
Jodi, when did you dose? Are you like 20, 30 minutes ago? Like, when is it going to hit?
Yeah, it was literally like 45 minutes ago.
Okay, why don't we do a
I'm on the
session?
come up right now.
Let's do a struggle session and see what happens on the other end of it.
Well, in terms
Jodi,
of
where's your
research on
privilege?
changing minds, they have shown that giving psychedelics to terminally ill people can really help them to come to terms with their death, and it can make long-lasting changes in people's lives if they've been depressed. So it really does seem to have the power, or these chemicals or drugs do seem to have the power to make long-lasting change in people's attitudes and feelings. And what you said, Jodi, is spot on about therapy, because it's really been turned into a profession of activists who are trained to get people to change the way that they interact with the world and see the world. It's not about helping that individual find their own change, their own path. It's about, remaking people in this social justice sort of cookie cutter mindset. So I spoke with a counselor recently who had done this training, the MAPS training, and I was really surprised to hear how woke it was. It really surprised me. And it's like,
MAPS is woke, really?
Well, I don't know if it's MAPS specifically, but she had done this training, this type of, like, she's licensed to do psychedelic assisted therapy. And during the conversation, she was talking about how it's like, they're really, the queering part is like, they make people feel terrible about cultural appropriation for using certain substances that outside of like their traditional uses and stuff. So that's,
okay.
But I don't know if there were, I don't remember hearing anything about using them in order to open people for the purpose of, social justice activism. But if they're being trained in that way, of course, that's going to infuse everything that they do with their clients. So
Setting, right? The set and setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're being trained as a psychotherapist, that woke is like the lens, social justice lens is through which you should see everything. And now you go and you get your certificate in psychedelic assisted therapy. Danger, danger, danger. I want to read this quote that I found from Dennis McKenna. Do you guys know who Dennis McKenna is? Terrence McKenna.
Terrence.
Like the father.
Terrence's brother, right? Is Dennis?
Dennis is his brother. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Dennis says, quote, "No wonder psychedelics are threatening to an authoritarian religious hierarchy. You don't need faith to benefit from a psychedelic experience, let alone a priest or even a shaman to interpret it. What you need is courage. Courage to drink the brew, eat the mushroom or whatever it is, and then pay attention and make of it what you will. Suddenly, the tools for direct contact with the transcendent other, whether you call it God or something else, is taken from the hands of an anointed elite, otherwise known as psychotherapist, and given to the individual seeker." Dennis McKenna said that. And this came up in my Solid Ground group last week. And one person pointed out, and I don't want to dismiss anyone who wants to have a guide or a trip sitter, because I think that's completely up to the individual. But if you are afraid to take a substance without having someone else there, and Deborah, you might have something different to say about this, then you might want to question whether or not you're ready to do that. Because part of the experience is, and I know we're going much deeper than where we started here, but part of the experience is that it's a direct experience. And then, I mean, what happened with the native Mexicans was the Spaniards came in and said, you have to stop doing these mushroom ceremonies because the Catholic Church is the only intermediary between you and God. This has been happening for
There was
centuries.
a bunch of human sacrifice too. Just there was a big cultural shift in that whole thing. So it wasn't just the mushrooms that were outlawed.
Like, what's the Aztecs? I don't know, somewhere back there.
But okay, so you bring up a good question. To what degree do we need some sort of mentorship or expertise, and to what degree do we lose out if we just say, I'm going to go on my own way? I mean, is there not a transportation of knowledge of ancestor expertise?
I think
how do we balance the need for a mentor, somebody that's greater than me, with my own agency, my own exploration?
I think it's good to have a mentor personally. That's just personally me. I was just relaying something somebody said, but I don't like that mentor using these ancient substances that have been around forever, right? Since the dawn of humanity, needs to be anointed by the state, by this, like by a legislature. You know what I mean? Like, people know how to, there are experienced people who know how to do this. You just need to find them, and that's part of the journey. That's just
you want the real lineage, right? And not this sort of like administrative, bureaucratic, I'm up the stamp now, right? You really have it coming down from, passed on from families, or this wisdom, from an authentic place, it sounds like.
But how do you contact somebody with true expertise in a world filled with strangers? Doesn't the bureaucracy come in because there's so many people? We need to very efficiently. Yeah, we need to efficiently.
The record labels, right?
Yeah, we need to efficiently understand if somebody's on board or not on board, and So I understand the need for those things, but without those things, without those regulatory bodies, without that stamp of approval, without accreditation, how do you know you can trust this person? I guess you have to look at their CV or something. They have to have a reputation, right?
You have to talk to them. Like, how much do you trust yourself, I guess, right? And how much do you want to do this? I mean, some people, I don't know, if you wake up and you decide, I want to do LSD tomorrow, and you start calling people on the phone, like, it feels like maybe you should take a couple years and make this your purpose for the next couple of years, that you're going to find that person. And really, like, that's a whole different kind of feeling than just like, I'm going to look on the internet and find somebody to help me do LSD tomorrow. Like, that's a whole different experience than taking 2 years to kind of get the word out and wait and meet people and then meet somebody else.
Okay, when's the last time you waited 2 years to take a psychedelic drug? They're either there on the porch with you or they're not.
Assuming a certain
no comment.
Maturity. Yeah, to some extent, the where people don't have their own maturity, it might be the anointed person that can weed them out and go, I don't think you should be doing this, even though you think you should. So
yeah. So, Deborah, you mentioned something called set and setting. Can we pretend that we don't know what we're talking about here, at least that I don't know what we're talking about here, and let's set up a proper conceptualization of this thing we call a trip.
Yeah, I throw that word out like I know a lot about it. So the rest of you, please chime in. I think it's just, doing something in an environment where there is probably some safety or some, there's at the very least, if it was a therapist, okay, we're in the office, it's quiet, people aren't going to barge in, we're going to let you lie on a comfortable couch, you'll have nice music in the headphones, you won't be interrupted, we're not going to, that's the thing where I think having an agenda would throw off set and setting, because it seems that it should be minimally stimulating, right? It should be minimally anything going into your experience other than something that makes you feel basically safe and quiet, and your body's not going to be disturbed. You could do
date night.
Yeah, or or you could do something in a ritual sense, right? That would be a different when you're doing a heavily spiritual intention, right? And then you might have the accoutrements of the shaman person who shows up with some sort of thing, and maybe you're doing some certain preliminaries that give it some sort of sacred quality, and that would be an interesting study to see if people have different trips depending on, were you in the office with the therapist, or were you, did you go to Peru?
And with,
I don't know.
with this kind of work, there's not only the work of sitting with someone through their experience, but there's also the work of reintegration afterwards and integrating what they experienced. And that seems like a place where the most like social justice or ideology feeding could take place, because you're then helping somebody to understand what it means. What did it mean, what you went through and what you thought and felt? And if your guide or the person that you're doing that kind of integration work with is ideologically biased and trained to spread this, then that would be their opportunity.
So do we have any examples of how like so-called wokeness inserts itself into therapy broadly speaking? Have you guys seen studies or seen like how you do that, how one goes about doing that, making a woke therapy session?
Well, yeah, there's like the one of the big ones is race broaching, broaching. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
Okay.
this idea where you talk to your client about race. You're supposed to do this, when I was in graduate school, we were trained to do this early on. Like when you're in the first session or two, you're supposed to talk to them about their race, what it means. And this is like right off the bat, it's almost like intake work with this person is what was your racial identity development like? And it's
cringe.
Yeah, it's really, really bad. Yeah, but that's an example. And there's a lot of work around that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't there the racial identity
salience
model?
Making them more salient. Yeah. What's the model?
Is that what it's called? Like that there's different model of psychological health or development based on what race you are.
Oh yeah,
like I've seen this. Like if you're white, it's like like you've reached a state of mental health when, along with your mental health, you've also achieved this ability to recognize your white privilege and your fragility versus your non-white. There's a different racial identity model of psychological development.
I'm gonna grab a book. You guys talk amongst your.
She's grabbing books.
And then, I heard somebody saying, I think it was Jen, about how, maybe I shouldn't repeat the story, but basically, I'll be very general. It was a story about how somebody went to therapy for trauma, and it was a very, very horrific interpersonal trauma. And the therapist informed the person that their trauma wasn't as bad as they felt or believed it was because they're white. And that's basically in my book, a re-trauma. It's basically complete invalidation.
Yeah, that's right. And there are like all these different models of racial identity development and what it means to be a white person going through the stages of coming to terms with race according to these things.
Who made these things up?
Well, this guy in part. This is Daryl Wing Sue.
We did.
And David.
Yeah, he did. This guy. This is the textbook. Yeah. This was a textbook used in my counseling program. And it's crazy. It's going to take me a minute to find this, but I'll find it. I'll come back in.
I don't imagine this has been empirically tested either, right?
Oh, and there's nothing empirical about any of it.
It's not.
Come on, Deborah.
I know. I'm saying the obvious. I'm saying the obvious.
Yeah.
Empiricism.
Well, so if it's just made up, right? If these like stages of racial development are made up and you try to implant them into somebody's imagination, like, are they going to stand up? Even if they are malleable or suggestible in a suggestive state, if these things just don't make any sense.
Here's what I see. I see, instead of somebody just being like coming out of an acid trip with one of these woke therapists and being like, oh my God, if you're white, like, I'm such a racist, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Like, I see a whole lot of fucking conflict, like increased conflict, increased maybe depression. Again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a mental health practitioner, but because it's false and because it doesn't make sense, because it's not true, I see a whole lot of poor mental health outcomes, basically.
Well, you brought up, oh, Leslie, you're gonna break us down. Can you describe where I am at in my racial reckoning quotient?
Well,
Is
here's
there like a little test I can do?
This is a 7-step process of white racial identity development. It's white Americans go through this. Apparently.
Do we start as Nazis or do we end up as Nazis? In what direction are we walking on this?
It says we encourage whites to use this information to explore themselves as racial cultural beings and to think about their implications for work with culturally diverse clients. Number 1 is the naivete phase. This phase is relatively neutral with respect to racial cultural differences. Its length is brief, and it's marked by naive curiosity about race. Between the ages of 3 and 5, however, the young white child begins to associate positive ethnocentric meanings to his or her own group and negative ones to others. So this is being taught to counselors. Like this is what your counselor is learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so by white, they mean everybody of European descent around the world, if they're in China or if they're in South Africa or if like they're in Brazil.
Well, this says white Americans. So maybe they are at least being a little bit specific.
Okay.
Like Puerto Rican Jew, would that be like white?
White enough?
Whitish.
Adjacent.
Yeah. And then they have like these little terrible vignettes that are, I'm not even going to read this.
Oh, like anecdotes?
Yeah.
Vignettes? Like my child was sitting down on the park bench.
Okay, I will read it because it's just awful. Okay, the following passage describes one of the insidious processes of socialization that leads to propelling the child into the conformity stage. Okay, it was a late summer afternoon. A group of white neighborhood mothers, obviously friends, had brought their 4 and 5-year-olds to the local McDonald's for a snack and to play on the swings and slides provided by the restaurant. They were all seated at a table watching their sons and daughters run about the play area. In one corner of the yard sat a small black child pushing a red truck along the grass. One of the white girls from the group approached the black boy and they started a conversation. During that instant, the mother of the girl exchanged quick glances with the other mothers who nodded knowingly. She rose from the table, walked over to the two, spoke to her daughter, and gently pulled her away to join her previous playmates. Within minutes, however, the girl again approached the black boy and both began to play with the truck. At that point, all the mothers rose from the table and loudly exclaimed to their children, "It's time to go now." And so this is being presented in a book for counselors.
Okay, but
it pisses me off. This pisses me off so much. Like this is normal. This is supposed to be like every white family does this with their kids.
Okay, but there's more than one interpretation of that event. Like where was the parents of this child, this black child? Like what were the interactions with that? And did somebody just make up this story or was this caught on camera?
It's just made up. It's Sue. Daryl Wing Sue. He just makes up these stupid anecdotes and puts them all in his book. And then you're supposed to think, oh wow, white people really suck.
It's usually a lot of mind reading. I went through some DEI training and exercises of so and so does this, and the interpretation is always the worst possible story you could make, with no instruction of maybe ask the other person, intent, like ask them what was going on. It was like, no, we know what was going on there.
Okay.
Well, that's the model of microaggressions, right? Like intent doesn't matter anyway, so we're not going to ask intent because we know.
So did you look into this queering the mushroom or whatever they call it? Because I'm of the mind that the racial stuff is already super cringy and it's kind of falling out of fashion after 2020. They really blew their wad, but the gender stuff is much more salient to a lot of people because we are, like it or not, very sexed creatures and stuff. So queering is it's got a longer shelf life than this white fragility stuff in my mind. So how would it be the case that one would be indoctrinated into queer theory via these seminars? Leslie or Deborah or Jodi, have you guys seen any of the queering of psychology and how that stuff takes place?
Well, I was reading an article about it this morning, the queering psychedelics thing. Yeah. And it's more of we need separate spaces for
queer folk.
Yeah. And so that was mostly what they're focusing on.
Queer. They don't want to make more queers. They want to set them apart, like some sort of caste.
Well, and they're also trying to specifically aim to train queer people of color to do this work. And so by queer people of color, they don't just mean someone who happens to be a person of color who also happens to be gay. They mean people who are of this
ideological,
ilk, this mindset. Yeah.
Fixation. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think they make a link to it too, because I see this link a lot. Like quite often in tribes where there is shamanic practices, it is quite often the person's the shaman might be gay or have some other identity and so I think there's this matching up of the sacred otherness of the shaman, and then in kind of making queerness into some sort of really specially sacred vehicle. And so I think there may be a way that they're like, oh, finally, like this is our place. Like we can take this psychedelic thing and this is our realm because we have this special gift of being this other thing or something.
Interesting.
Opens up the question of hermaphrodism in shamanic practices, or if there are cultures where the shaman or the sacred one is usually somehow outside of the sexual binary or at odds with it in some way, shape, or form. Because if you are outside of that, and I see a lot of the aspiration, or some of the aspiration for gender medicalization is to escape. It's not even to get away from, to become a man if you're a woman, or to become a woman if you're a man. But there's this aesthetic, just trying to escape, trying to get into Peter Pan, trying to get into beyond the sex, beyond puberty. And you see that a little bit too with the Munchie moms, the Munchausen moms, like where they're trying to liberate their child, their very gifted, very special child from maturity, from death, right? From being chained to family. They can sit outside of society and then bring us knowledge. Then we bring up the indigo children. Recently,
what are the indigo children?
There was this big, I think it was on Oprah or something. There's this big like hubbubaloo about like this next generation, probably like the millennials or Gen Z were going to be the indigo children, and they're going to come from some sort of other plane of existence and bring up humanity to the next thing, to the next level. So psychedelics already lend oneself to shamanic practices, to magical thinking, and put gender in the mix. And you got a bunch of gooey mushroom-like kind of infinite sexuality. Don't mushrooms have like 32 like different kinds of like sex chromosomes or something?
Yeah, mushrooms are they're not sexed. They're not even plants, really.
They're fruiting bodies of mycelium.
Yeah, they're mycelium.
Okay.
They're not, they are kind of outside.
It's got really sensual really quick. Fruiting bodies.
That's what the mushroom is. It's
the mycelium is actually
sounds really queer.
There's mycelial networks all underground. There's so much mycelium underneath of us. In fact, I think the biggest living creature on the planet is a fungus in Oregon. Is that right?
It ties this aspen forest together, something, right?
Yeah, and this is how the trees communicate too. Trees actually communicate to each other through mycelium.
Yeah, a lot of people speculate that's the mushroom. Is that like the mushroom? We call it the fruiting body is just like a very temporary small part of the actual mushroom. Is the mycelium is the thing.
Yeah, and it's neither animal nor plant. It's its own thing.
And it breathes oxygen, not carbon dioxide.
Oh,
I didn't know that part. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's not a plant. It's different.
There's a sweet movie Paul Stamets has on Netflix on mushrooms. Have you seen it? Yeah.
Fantastic fungi.
Yeah.
Is there
fungi or whatever?
Fantastic fungi facts you want to drop, Deborah?
I'm not remembering it. I'm just remembering all the sprouting.
It's beautiful. It's really pretty. Yeah. Lots of time lapse photography. So you can watch the mushrooms go through all the stages of development.
I am trying to remember that there are some substances that people talk about having more of a masculine quality, and like ayahuasca, people tend to say that they have way more of the feminine, and it feels like a feminine spirit. I don't know if it's peyote or what feels more masculine, but it feels like the journey are different. I don't know because I haven't done them.
Or like LSD and mushrooms. A lot of people, LSD feels more masculine versus the
more mental,
more feminine. Or digital versus analog. Or like,
oh gosh, ketamine was so digital to me.
Let's do the part of the show where we all get into our trips.
Well, I didn't take ketamine recreationally. I had it injected
by
into
accident,
me.
Right?
Well, I was in the
I didn't
hospital.
inhale. Yeah.
No, I was in the hospital, and it was given to me as a painkiller because I was in a lot of pain, and painkillers weren't doing the trick. And so the nurse came in and just shot me with ketamine, didn't really prepare me for what that was going to be. And it was like the most terrifying 5 minutes of my entire life. It was so scary. And everything was squares. It was these boxes. And it was this bizarre experience. I thought I was dead. And afterwards, I told the nurse that I had trauma bonded to her. It was like this Stockholm syndrome thing where she was this evil, horrible person. And now I wanted her to be my friend. It was a bizarre experience.
How did you guys work that relationship out? Did she just kind of ghost you?
She was a real jerk, but I had a real weird, desire to be be to her after.
That's a good example. There you go. Of what could happen, what could go wrong.
She had been horrible. She'd been such a jerk the whole time. And bad nurse. And then even up to injecting me with a substance that she didn't tell me about until I was already tripping on it. But afterwards I was like, can we be friends? It's very weird.
I'm sorry that happened to you.
Thanks. I don't know how people I don't get how ketamine is a useful substance after that, but I guess it must be because it's being used really widely.
Using it.
It's an anesthetic. It's a great anesthetic because you don't have to monitor your breathing or your heart rate like it was used in the Vietnam War. Like you can use it on battlefield, like anybody can administer it. It has a very low, it's very hard to overdose on it. I'm not a doctor, but it's great for like wartime because you don't need an anesthesiologist. Basically, like you can cut somebody's limb off and they're out, they don't feel it, but there's no danger of their respiration of them expiring from lack of respiration or heartbeat or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a miracle drug in that sense.
Well, if you think you're dead, then you're not really feeling pain. You're just outside of your body.
Jeez Louise.
I thought I was dead.
So Leslie, in the wake of that, do you feel like you were kind of for like a period of like, I don't know, weeks, days, months in a suggestible state, or kind of like popped out of yourself and like having to reconfigure reality after having such a harsh feeling of deadness or square land?
Oh, maybe. I think I still am a little bit weird after that. I think maybe
so
I was
it kind of initiated
before,
like a process of like redefining your relationship to reality.
Yeah. And I had aftershocks of it for a long time. I would have just like I could close my eyes and kind of go back there, and it really had it had a profoundly negative effect on me because it made me so much more afraid of death. It was I guess a bad trip, so they say those can really stay with you a long time.
Another, I don't know if you want to talk about it here, so forgive me, but didn't you have another experience that had nothing to do with substances, but it was an experience? But was that before or after this?
After. After. Yeah, I had actually two. I had one that was like, I think of it as like a mini epiphany. And then I had what feels like a full epiphany. And I know this sounds really weird, but they were really profound experiences to me. And it was after that. And substance free, unless you count water.
That sounds like this. Oh, go ahead, Benjamin.
Oh, I was just going to follow up on that. Do you feel like you would have benefited from somebody to talk you through this who had expertise, or do you feel up to the task of interpreting these profound experiences for yourself, Leslie?
I like to talk about them with people who are interested in talking with me. I think I like to verbally process. So it's really helpful to have somebody to talk with. I'm kind of with Jodi on it though, about whether I'd go to somebody licensed and certified. I don't know that that's necessarily the most helpful combination of things for this. So just having good friends is a great way to process stuff like this. And so yes, in a way, does that answer the question?
I was just trying to bring it back to the role of mentorship or malleability, being able to interpret your own.
Maybe it's more about trust, or how we interpret trust. Like you trust a friend, and that feels like you trust them for a reason. Like you've been friends for a while, and then perhaps in this realm, like this person has had their own experiences maybe, and you trust them to be able to talk with you in a certain way and bring out certain things in you. Like there's trust. But then there's like looking somebody up in the phone book because they have letters after their name. Like, do you trust somebody just because of that? Like, is that supposed to, it's almost like we're supposed to trust. That's like the state telling you, oh, you can trust this person because we have overseen that they deserve these letters after their name. And that's
somebody, so I think you're bringing up something kind of interesting about, different levels of, the relationship between trust and authority. Now, we trust our friends, but not because they have authority in any given realm, other than that we have developed some sort of rapport, and maybe we keep on being friends with them because they understand how to help us process or witness us or ask us questions right there. But a doctor, a coach, a licensed professional counselor, or something like that has an authority that's tagged on. And insofar as the regulatory bodies that bestow that authority are corrupt or incorrupt, trustworthy or untrustworthy, then we can trust or not trust the authority, and then the authoritative figure.
Yeah, really, that certification is just a shortcut. It's just like a shortcut that says, here, they're stamped with this, they did this thing. So, but at the end of the day, it's only as meaningful as you find whatever they did in order to achieve that to be, because the person underneath of that is still just a person that you would have to establish a relationship with in order to know how much you really want to put faith in them, whatever that might be. So word of mouth, or
Catholic, which goes back to Catholic Church, right? Like, oh, this person has access to God because they're a priest.
To push back on that, you have the Catholic Church that bestows authority on the priests, but outside of the Catholic Church, you just have charismatic individuals that aren't vetted by anything other than their personal magnetism. And that's why you have, in the wake of Protestantism, especially in America, cult after cult after cult after cult after cult, because there's no central authority.
I'm not talking about cults. I'm talking about friends versus just a friend, right? Like that you actually trust.
And I'm just breaking through different kinds of authority figures, those who are certified and those who are self-certified, or who, through either charisma or a good track record, pull people toward them. So just being anti-authoritarian or anti-bureaucracy doesn't save you from the fact that people do acquire power.
There's an article I put on the platform that Frank Furedi wrote recently on authority, and it's really, I wish I could remember it well, because he even had the authority wasn't, because I'm invested with it was something about the being of the person in some sense, as opposed to some, like, I have some rule making sort of thing. Because I sit here and as I think about this, I think if I've said it, if I did it, I'd probably have some really difficult integration, and I would want people who knew what the hell to do with that. Like, I don't think my friends would know what to do with it. And so where is that there's somebody that has knowledge from experience? I don't care whether they're certified or not, but like, I would want the existence of that. I don't know then how you'd go finding them, because again, there's like so many charlatans for every probably good person, but I value someone having knowledge and skill in this domain. But it is tricky, like how is it just because your friends network and you got referrals, and then that feels good because you trust your friends' experiences? Like, do we joke about having a Yelp or something for the shaman?
For shamans.
Well, how did people do it before? No, Deborah, I think that's exactly right. Like, you have friends, you get to know somebody, you spend time. I mean, despite Benjamin joking about, hey, if there's a strip of acid on the front porch, you're just going to do it. Like, why would you wait 2 years? I think, especially now, there's a lot of people who are in their middle age. Let's face it, the psychedelic experience is different when you're in your middle age and you're looking at death versus when you're younger and the whole world is before you, and who do take time to think about, okay, do I want to do this, and how do I want to do it? And they start talking to people, and that's part of the whole experience. before the substance even touches your tongue. Like that's part of the beginning of the journey, is if you want somebody to be there with you, who is it going to be? And then, yes, going through friends. I mean, who else would you go through? You go through your trusted networks. That's who you go through for everything, pretty much, isn't it? I mean, even like a hairdresser. Well, maybe not a hairdresser, but you know what I mean.
Something you said about earlier about Jodi, like if you need somebody to guide you through that in that clinical kind of way, are you really ready to even do that thing? That I'm kind of circling back to that, because I thought that was a really interesting point, because it's like, it's inherently
can't trust a friend.
Right. It's kind of an inherently unsafe thing you're doing, because it's mentally unsafe. What you're doing is like digging into parts of your mind that you don't know what you're really going to find.
Well, like on your own or outside of the therapeutic
at
office?
all. At all.
Well, if you think you need, if you're the kind of person who thinks you need the letters after the name, right, to do this substance, and you can't trust, it's almost like you can't trust yourself in a way. Well, like if you think that you need the letters, then maybe you've got too much trust going on.
I would reverse engineer that. Somebody probably goes to the therapist because they have, let's say, just chronic depression, and they're trying a therapist, and the therapist says, we can try this substance. So you're not going to the therapist to the substance, you're going to the therapist for the problem. And so the substance is already always serving the pursuit of solving the problem of depression or quitting smoking or any given thing that the therapist suggests. So it's the difference between trying to find Prozac on the street or going to a doctor, and then after he looks through what you're doing, then he prescribes you Prozac, or going to the doctor and like seeking Prozac and then trying to figure out how to game him for the Prozac, right? So in the medical context, the drug is not the same as on the street, or even like you're going to go on a spirit quest. It's like, we have a conception that this helps this problem. We have trials, we have data. This is what's backed up. And so here's what we're going to do. You're going to trip out. We're going to play some music. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to insert some sort of racial consciousness into you that's going to actually solidify your obedience to my overlord. And then we're going to go forth and you're going to be better. And we're going to crush the powers that be, or whatever, right?
No, there's the issue of if one consider making a market, even, or because I listened to, is it Jamie Wheel talking about the psychedelics, like once something becomes in the market, and capitalism and trading and something that used to be potentially a sacred activity, like what happens to it, bureaucratized, marketized, and all of that, and does it lose something by being contained and formulated that way? Obviously there's all the problems inherent in it, but it's funny because people think they're doing it to make it all safer, right?
Well, it
like
also destigmatizes, it's the destigmatization, I think, that would appeal to some people, like you said, like the middle-aged, well, I guess we're all kind of middle-aged now, but
saying that.
Leslie, that's a good, like, that gets into this authority thing. Like, the authorities said this is okay, versus this is taboo, so I'm not going to go near. Well, who said it's taboo? That's just a story you told yourself from the authority.
True. Right? It's true, but like, how much have you internalized that story? How much are you a bad person if you do drugs, or if the doctor gives it to you, is this now just fine? And I feel like that's really prevalent. And so,
do you think the world, the Gen Z, would be better off if they were being prescribed LSD rather than testosterone, exogenous hormones? Do you think like there would be a overall increase or decrease in depression, anxiety, and
just microdose instead?
Yeah,
I would say microdosing. They would be better off. Yes,
their dysphoria away. I wonder if somebody's done research into microdosing and dysphoria, or body dysmorphia, or gender dysphoria. I wonder to what degree one can align with their sense of reality, their doors of perception plugging into themselves as a female or male body can be facilitated by a psychological rather than a...
Well, that kind of research, Benjamin, is not gender affirming, and therefore probably considered transphobic. I'm just guessing. Right?
We'll see about that.
That kind of implies you're exploring versus immediately affirming.
Yeah.
So it's probably considered...
we should bring it to Sagam or Geta and say, why don't you guys do some psychological or psychedelic trials while you're dealing with... I'm sure even WPATH and EPATH, there's enough like There's enough
Well, they-
crazies in there that would kind of embrace.
Well, now that they've got the queering of everything, I think it would go a different way.
You think?
Yeah.
How long is the shelf life on this queering stuff, on this white fragility, this racial consciousness stuff? Does it really lead to anything other than isolation?
Well, Benjamin, you brought up earlier about the queering stuff, like we're all sexed bodies.
Yeah.
Jenny Holland, sorry, she wrote an article recently about how the white fragility stuff, the CRT stuff, is only really making major inroads in countries that have prosperity guilt. Thank you, Jenny, for coining that term.
Nice.
Like the United States or the UK, and like other countries where people have like real problems because they aren't prosperous. Like it's not really making inroads, but the trans stuff, the gender ideology stuff is like everybody is a sexed body. It's like the original other. Like if you go back to the beginning of time, like male, female, no matter, even if the entire tribe was all the same color, like that is the one thing that that affects all of us. And so that is a place where major inroads, as Jenny would put it, that is the agenda, because it affects everybody and you can kind of exploit it no matter what the culture is, because there's always going to be a difference between those two groups, no matter.
Yeah, as long as people have, what were you saying, Leslie, the other night about people having sufficient like resources or the certain needs are taken care of. You don't really, I don't see people tripping out about their gender if they're still like struggling to, get by.
Like a Maslow's
unless
hierarchy.
those ideas, yeah, unless those ideas are kind of in their environment, like in inner city, kind of like the queering, the queer people of color are kind of they see a path toward hierarchy.
Yeah.
What?
So
or they see it as a way to
again,
gain status and power, right? Anyway,
I really like Jenny. I love her writing. She has a good way of.
Oh my God, I
things.
do too. She comes up with these terms.
Mm-hmm.
What's her name again?
Jenny Holland.
Jenny
I would
Holland.
love to talk with her. I enjoyed meeting her in New York.
We should have her on the live stream.
Oh yeah, let's do.
Benjamin, I was in Northern Ireland a couple weeks ago, and Posey Parker was there, and I don't know if you know who Posey Parker is. I've been following Posey Parker for a long time.
Okay, yeah.
Wait, did you talk to her?
We talk like every 3 months.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't watch the.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
I need to tune in more.
I get around. I'm a bit of a slut in this whole.
She's hot. She's hot stuff.
Oh yeah, she's got a great milkshake, man. Brings this boy to her yard. I'll tell you that much.
She's really cool. Anyway, she was speaking in Northern Ireland in Belfast, and like, of course, I call them Trans Tifa was there, and
Pantifa.
Trans Tifa, yeah. And Jenny, anyway, I went with Jenny and we had a good time. And yeah, Jenny's an amazing writer, very sharp. She's kind of like the love child of Toby Young. I don't know if you know who that is. He started
Free Speech
Alliance. Yeah, Free Speech Union. Toby Young and Julie Burchill, who's also a UK writer, like a rock music critic.
Bindle or Burchill?
No, not Bindle. Well, maybe that too, but Julie Burchill's more a music critic, and she's not really in this sphere that we're in, but
yeah.
Anyway, enough about it. Anyway, okay. Jenny was positing that the gender stuff does go beyond the prosperity guilt cultures, or at least that's the attempt and that's the agenda, is because, okay, this race stuff isn't going to infiltrate everywhere because people in poor countries have real problems, but maybe the gender stuff will. Maybe we can somehow exploit some feelings of resentment, I don't know, in maybe a mother who has 15 children and her husband is off having, I don't know, like, but I can see how it might be possible, even if you're living in a very poor culture, to maybe exploit that difference. somehow.
So there's like national socialism and international socialism, and I'm just riffing here. The CRT stuff is very national socialist. If you want to like impose a homogeneity or a new class consciousness or whatever in order to do the whole socialist project of creating a utopia, CRT, the race stuff is going to be really very area dependent, whereas you could probably get closer to a world socialism if you attack the gender issue. I don't know to what degree the UN. I know they're kind of weird with their whole gender thing and their women's thing and all this stuff. I don't know to what extent the WEF utilizes race consciousness or gender consciousness, but that's kind of a part of it. They're more into like class or a classless society, which is more kind of like a more high-brained kind of Marxism.
But isn't the comprehensive sex ed stuff coming straight out of the UN? That's straight from the UN. The comprehensive sex ed stuff. Like
you get to see a 3D model of everybody's body?
No, it's the sex education that starts in preschool, really. And it starts with talking to people about these kind of issues and bringing up questioning gender to young kids and introducing them to advanced concepts too soon and stuff like that.
Yeah. If you can alienate children from their bodies, then you can really alienate them from other places. It's better to do it with with sex than race if you wanted to really brainwash a.
I still think there's a bulwark. I think there's a bulwark in terms of how many countries are still, if they're largely like a religious, population or more, conservative population. I think that could hit, because I think the CRT kind of ties with the colonialization or decolonized project, and that seems more likely to spread than people in countries that might be more traditionally Muslim or traditionally whatever, right? Like I think you're going to hit something and they're going to be like no. So I don't know where you could get them on those stupid colonizers, those horrible colonizers, regardless of your sort of degree of religious observance or something. So I don't know, we'll see.
Well, any final thoughts? I want to maybe keep this to around an hour. So what do you guys think? Any final thoughts coming up that we didn't say?
Jodi,
okay.
No, you, Deborah.
Okay. In some ways it doesn't surprise me. I understand like all the alarm of the queer thing, because insofar as like one is removing boundaries, right? Like doing these substances is just open you completely. No limits, your identity, like everything. It's not surprising that some movement or worldview that is all this normalcy or these structures or a problem, we need to tear them all down, that they would like be attracted to that, right? It doesn't surprise me. Whether they can recognize the dangers of that, the people that have these, maps or whatever, and can catch themselves, like, is another story, but it's resonant in some way.
Jodi, you look like you're deep in thought.
I want to hear Jodi's best trip.
That's we can have a private conversation about that, Benjamin.
Okay. Offline, okay.
I was just thinking, offline. About this, the phrase itself, queering psychedelics. Like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, we're gonna queer psychedelics, like we're gonna take this little like sugar cube with LSD and we're gonna queer it. No, what are we doing? We're gonna queer people? Like, what does that mean? And then really, what does queering mean anyway? Like, I don't know, I guess you go
making the abnormal normal, right?
Yeah.
And to some extent constantly destabilizing, because even at that point there'd probably be another ratchet of
explicitly,
like that's too normal now, right?
Yes.
Well, it's this supposition that like the use of I get how it's not necessarily like we're gonna like use psychedelics and make everyone queer, although I think that's probably in there too, but but it's this notion of like we want to give more queer people the opportunity to participate in the psychedelic discussion and use psychedelics, and as Leslie said, more providers who are helping with this facilitation of these substances and their use. But like, it's kind of this presumption that queer people, whatever that means, have not been involved. Like that psychedelic use of these medicines is somehow this, like, in and of itself, some kind of racist or colonialist thing, when anything could, it's like far from the truth. So I can see the cultural appropriation argument, even though I disagree with it, but like,
I think it's also, it's a marketing term, right? These people, they know that there is a market overlap between drug users and people who are into queer shit, right? So they're like advertising to do queer shit with drugs, right? And so they're going to do this, and they're special. They get to wear special clothing, and then they get to trip out, on their own weirdness.
Like, come when you're flipping through the phone book, you should choose me because I'm queer.
Yeah,
like I'm.
That's like a real thing. Yeah, that's a thing.
It's not even a virtue signal. It's a market signal.
It's tribal.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. But
I love the phone book, Jodi. I love your phone book.
All right. Probably. I mean, I'm Gen X. I know what a phone book is.
No, I know. Same, right?
My kids are gonna be like, "What the fuck is a phone book?" It's Google. Okay.
Yeah. Boomer Google. Yeah.
Google. All right. Benjamin, any final thoughts from you?
No, it was thought stimulating. Sad that we didn't get more stories. Leslie, we only heard about your bad trip. We didn't hear about your good trips, but it's interesting. I think that these things are novel. I don't know to what extent. Well, I guess we have constantly brought up the fact that it's kind of a maleficent force, whatever this thing called wokeness is. It always tends to limit things. It always tends to speak to certain aspects of the personality that and otherwise are maladaptive, like narcissism, borderline personality, and so on and so forth. So insofar as it's not cool, insofar as it becomes more and more cringe, and insofar as people understand it to be a signal of cringe and bad acting, not even bad actors, or just like lame kind of people, it will be less prominent. It'll have less authority, and it will it'll have less steam in its taking over or centering itself in any given organization and stuff. So, like we've all worked with or are aware of people who are trying to work on an institutional or organizational level to either purge or protect any given organization from the queerness, the CRT stuff. But it ultimately diverts attention away from something that could be very beneficial, and kind of like it aims it in a certain direction that I personally don't believe is all that terribly productive. So
that's so hopeful.
Yeah, I like that. There's an expiration date.
Right. I see
so.
The young children, because I'm around young children because I have sons, and
they're like, nah,
it's quotient.
Yeah.
It's cringe to them, and that's very hopeful to me. I'm like,
it's fake and gay, and a certain GHEY.
GHEY, yes.
Yes.
Well, I think we should talk about that next time or soon. We should talk about the expiration date of woke and what's going to kill it.
That's hopeful. That's hopeful.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. And thanks for everybody who joined us in the chat. Andrew Joyner, thank you so much for the super chat. It's really sweet. And I hope y'all have a great week.
Thanks for joining us.